Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist where we are going through the book titled How to Unlock Your Subconscious Mind Through the Science of Mental Analysis. This book was co-authored by Elsie Lincoln Benedict and Ralph Payne Benedict. It was published in 1921 and it is in the public domain. If you are new to my channel, welcome. So glad you found us. And to our Fortune family, hello, hello. Glad that you could join. All right, so I'm not going to expound so much on the previous chapter. It was definitely very interesting. It is the foundation for manifestation because it's all about the transmutation of our emotions. All right, so I'll go ahead and we'll start now with lesson 3. This section starts with a poem, and then as soon as I read that, we'll go into the chapter. Fear is the twin of faith's sworn foe, distrust. If one breaks in your heart, the other must. Fear is the open enemy of good. It means the God in man misunderstood. Who walks with fear a down's life road will meet his boon companions, failure and defeat. But look the bully boldly in the eyes with mien undaunted, and he turns and flies. Lesson 3. Dissolving our fixed fears. In the back of his mind, each individual has a mass of fixed preferences and prejudices. The fundamental predilections of his nature are due to his type and are held in common with all others of that type. Their origin is biological, as has been fully treated in our course, the 5 human types. But in addition to these, and alongside of them, there are myriads of little attitudes peculiar and personal to each and every individual, and which come from his training, his education, his environment, and his experience. Beans and apples. To realize the difference between the biological foundations of your nature, the things that make you in the by and large, and the 100 of inclinations and indispositions which are privately and personally your own make, you might visualize a half-bushel basket full of apples. These are your type traits. They make up your fundamentals. But after the basket is as full of apples as it will hold, you can pour into the chinks a very large amount of navy beans. These are akin to the personal peculiarities which fill in the main outline called you. In every individual over 5 years of age, there are literally thousands of these miniature but mighty eccentricities which help or hinder us. They vary as widely and exist as universally as the human beings who possess them, which helps to account for the fact that no 2 people in the world are exactly alike. Where they come from. The average man, though he possesses and is only too often possessed by these automatic attitudes, seldom realizes their existence in his subconscious, much less conceives of their causes. He often imagines he makes his decisions volitionally, when his friends have long since learned that under certain circumstances he is sure to react a certain way. He always gives reasons, and he is perfectly sincere in imagining these reasons are the real foundation of his decisions. But a mass of complicated machinery run by very definite psychological and physiological forces of which he is entirely unconscious, really works out the reaction he gives to almost every situation. He knows little or nothing about psychology, and so neither sees his mental wheels go round nor even dreams of the vast plant in which they operate. Origin of fixed feelings. As before explained, we get the main fundamentals of our natures, the outlines, from our biological type. But the dense fancies, faiths, and fears are impressed on us by environment. There are three kinds of fixed feelings: fixed fears, fixed faiths, and fixed fancies. Every fixed fear comes from an experience which produced so painful an emotion that the memory sank deep into the subconscious mind. The reason we're so often unconscious of the origin of these fixed feelings is, as stated earlier, that the conscious mind deals in thoughts, but the subconscious in feelings. And because they usually arise from experiences which occurred in childhood before the conscious mind was developed. But the subconscious, being thoroughly alive even in babyhood, remembers the emotion while the conscious one forgets the cause. The more intense any feeling, emotion, the more does the conscious mind tend to forget it. This is true for two very interesting reasons. The first is that since we cannot think deeply and feel deeply at the same moment, any intense emotion, feeling, temporarily dethrones the conscious thinking mind and thus prevents its having a very clear conscious memory of what happens. You will note how little you can recall of the things you did or said during excitement or any intense emotion. The conscience, which never forgets anything, and especially never forgets an emotion, is deeply concerned with every emotional experience. Every intensely emotional experience makes an impression so deep that its permanent mark is left on the subconscious. Secondly, to be reminded of any deep emotion so interferes with the work of the conscious mind that it is automatically on the defensive. Psychology of fears. When an emotion is extremely painful, a scar is left, which is easily irritated ever after by anything which reminds the subconscious of the original pain. We so often have revulsions of feeling against people and things without in the least knowing why. Whenever this happens, it is because the person or thing which you automatically dislike, while doubtless innocent in itself, bears a resemblance to the symbol by which the old painful experience was recorded in the subconscious. The subconscious, as you will recall, does not deal in thoughts nor details, but reduces everything to simple symbols which ever afterward stand for the original. Why you dislike people. When, for instance, you take an instantaneous dislike to an individual, even before you have spoken to him, it is because he brings up the symbol of some past painful emotional experience. The way he combs his hair, or the tilt of his ear, may bring up the old ugly picture subconsciously. You may never have noticed that the person you disliked combed his hair that way, and you may not be consciously aware now that the present man does. But the subconscious noted it in the first man and is reminded of it by the second. Foolish as all this seems to practical, everyday souls, it is invariably the real reason. The conscious mind is not so impressionable, but remember, the conscious mind reasons, whereas the subconscious feels, and that blindly. The illustration holds good only concerning people whom you dislike instantaneously. Laws of our personal dislikes. The following little rules will clarify the reasons for your likes and dislikes of people. When you dislike a stranger instantaneously and before he has spoken, it is because something about him reminds you of the symbol of a painful experience. When you dislike a stranger after the first 5 minutes of conversation with him, it is because of his personality. When you dislike him after a long acquaintance, it is because his type conflicts with yours. Psychology of fixed faiths. Faith is the opposite of fear. It operates in exactly the opposite manner on the mind, body, and spirit of man. Faith is a stimulant, fear a deadly narcotic. Faith is food, fear is poison. Faith develops, fear destroys. Recalling again that the subconscious does not think, but feels, and that faith is a feeling, you will see why faith has been necessary to the uplift of mankind. Thoughts are cold things compared with feelings, and the faith that moves mountains is always a matter of heart more than of head. Law of fixed faiths. Every fixed faith comes from one or many experiences which produced emotions so pleasing and uplifting that the memory of them sank deep into the subconscious mind. This accounts for the fact that cold logic never swerved any man from any religious faith which had fully satisfied him in times of need. Conversely, no man was ever completely won to any religious faith till his emotions had been appealed to, no matter how logical the evangelist. No public speaker ever became famous on his reasoning. His heart, as well as his head, had to talk. We are creatures of feeling, much more than thinking, but our success in life depends upon directing our feelings by thinking. When you like people. All of us are swayed in favor of certain people purely upon our feelings. We see men and women whom we instantaneously like or even love without being able to tell why. They may have none of the qualities we have always supposed necessary to the winning of our love, just as the other person we disliked may have had them all. But we love them, that's all. This illuminating new science of mental analysis shows us it is no accident that we instantaneously like or love another person. Whenever this happens, it is because that person reminds the subconscious of a symbol which stands for some highly pleasurable emotion or group of pleasurable emotions in our past experience. Woman in the fur hat. A man of our acquaintance who owned a grocery store told us that for 30 years he had made it a point to wait on every woman who came into his store wearing a fur hat. No matter what he was doing, he let a clerk take his customer and gave his attention to the fur-hatted woman. He had just one other fixed feeling, and it was of an opposite nature. Whenever a man came in wearing an oil coat, he waited on him only if there was no one else to do it, and hustled him out as quickly as possible. He had no idea of the origin of these fixed attitudes till the above explanation was made. Next day, he recalled vividly 2 experiences which he had not remembered for many years, and which had given rise to the fixations. As a boy, he had lived in Canada, where the winters were long and severe. His mother, whom he adored and who died when he was 7, always wore a fur hat in the winter months, a fact which he did not consciously remember, but which was corroborated by her photographs and by his uncle, the mother's brother, with whom he lived. Into his childish and sensitive subconscious had gone the memory of those happy emotions which his mother had given him, and all of which were symbolized by a woman in a fur hat. The man in the oil coat. The explanation of his repugnance to men in oil coats was equally easy to analyze once he was given a clue to his subconscious. His father, though a predominantly kind man, was a very austere one, and as a boy he had been very much afraid of him. His father often threatened to punish him, but he could remember only one time when he did so, and that was one time when he did not deserve it. The father accused him of taking an axe to the woods and losing it when, as a matter of fact, he had not touched the axe and had seen his father take it away himself that morning. The father denied this and gave the boy a severe whipping. When he did so, he had just come in from looking everywhere for the axe and still wore his heavily oiled coat. I never smell an oil coat without experiencing the same sufferings I had during the few moments my father was lashing me. In this case, the oil coat had become, in an emotional moment, the symbol of injustice, unhappiness, punishment, and disgrace. Popular fixed fears. Superstition against Friday the 13th, refusal to walk under ladders, hatred of having one's path crossed by a black cat, fear of raising an umbrella indoors, the superstition against going back home to get something without sitting down to count 10, and the certainty that breaking a mirror means 7 years of bad luck, are a few of the most widespread and popular fixed fears. Almost every man and woman has one or more of these ancient superstitions so deeply planted in his mind that he would just a little rather avoid them. The only thing that can be said about them is that they belong to the Dark Ages. Psychology of fixing fancies. But all our fixed feelings are not of an intensely happy or unhappy nature. Many of them are tinged only with sufficient pleasurable feeling to make us know we have a definite preference, not necessarily a faith. On the other hand, we may have just enough prejudice against a person or thing to experience a vague unrest or the merest opposition, without its being sufficiently poignant to be called a fear. But always an instantaneous opposition, however slight, is the result of some previous painful emotion. Fear of knives. A woman was obsessed by a fear of everything with a cutting edge. She could not work at her kitchen table so long as the butcher knife was in sight. Whenever she had to use it for cutting bread or cake, she put it away as soon as possible. If her scissors fell into her lap while sewing, she could not take another stitch until she had removed them. Whenever her husband or sons left their razors on the wash basin in the bathroom, she was ill half the morning. If she saw a penknife on the desk when writing a letter, she could not go on until she had put it in a drawer, and then was usually too upset to finish. This condition had persisted since before she could remember, and was getting worse. The husband, after 10 years of trying to cure her of it by telling her to forget it, had finally accepted her strange fear and was careful to put all such things out of sight. But their 4 sons were now grown and all living at home. They could never remember mother's freakish terror and left their razors and knives about, where she was constantly coming in contact with them. She was told by the mental analyst that this obsession was nothing more nor less than a fear fixed in her subconscious by some past painful experience in which a sharp-edged instrument had figured and which had ever since been a symbol of that painful emotion. She was asked to let the matter lie fallow in her mind for a few days, to make no special effort to remember, but to leave her memory free to recall anything connected with such an experience which might account for it. We saw her every day for a week, but she could remember no incident of the kind. Her disturbance at not having been able to recall anything proved that she had been straining her conscious mind, the very opposite of the proper method. We told her to loosen her mental grip and let her mind drift for a few days or even weeks until the memory came of its own accord. Explanation of the fear. In a few days, she returned. She had dug up from her subconscious the recollection which fully explained the obsession. In her childhood, her parents had been very poor. When she was 3, they lived in a tumble-down house where the windows had no catches and, to be kept open, had to be held up with sticks or other things. One summer day, for lack of anything else, the mother had propped up a window in the kitchen with a long butcher knife. A few minutes later, she had seen her baby sister, whom she dearly loved, push the knife over, and in doing so permitted the window to fall upon the knife whose blade laid the baby's palm wide open. Fear of sirens and sawdust. But the subconscious does not always choose such obvious elements as symbols, and frequently chooses less significant ones instead of the outstanding things we might expect. This is aptly illustrated in the case of a woman who had 2 terrors, neither of which seemed to bear any relation to the other or to anything she could recall. She was forced to the conclusion that she needed an analysis when she discovered she could not enjoy her new home, a beautiful frame house in a Middle Western town, because of her long-standing dislike of the smell of new lumber. They had moved into the house before it was finished, and the odor of the pine boards became unbearable. Her husband suggested that she take a trip, that she was nervous and overwrought, but it was impossible for her to leave just as the new furniture and hangings were to be installed. One other thing had greatly disturbed her: the fire siren. This was one of those small towns where a steam whistle is used for a fire alarm. The new home was within a block of the factory whose siren was used for this purpose. Its screech was deafening and left her nervous for hours afterward. When told that these fears were from something which had happened in her past, and doubtless in her childhood, she could recall nothing at the moment. But next day, she related the story, which was afterward corroborated by her sister. Its details came out as vividly as though it had happened the day before, which was not as surprising as it sounds. Though her subconscious had kept the memory below the threshold of her conscious mind, this secret hiding of it had caused it to be etched in with even greater vividness than it would otherwise have been. This woman had grown up in a lumber camp. When about 4 years of age, she had witnessed an accident at the sawmill. One of the men, in handling the logs, had slipped, lost his balance, and had his foot carried with the log into the saw. She had seen him fall, and almost died of fright as the great jagged saw teeth sliced his foot from the ankle. She saw it fall off into the sawdust. Ever after, the smell of lumber and the sight of sawdust were subconsciously symbols of that experience. Her aversion to sirens and other screeching noises was as obvious as the other elements, when we recall that this peculiarly shrill scream of the saw accompanies every cut into a log. She was so much more taken up with the awful sight that she was not conscious of having heard the screech of the saw at the moment of the accident, but the subconscious recorded it as part of the symbol. When this memory was allowed to air itself fully, the obsession began to fade, and in a few months had entirely disappeared. A man's story. A Minneapolis man caused much comment among his friends a few years ago. He was handsome, had more than average means, was much sought after by women, equally popular among men, and a success in business. He was fastidious in his dress and person to the point of eccentricity. Any one of a dozen wealthy and beautiful society girls would gladly have accepted him in marriage, but he seemed to have no serious affairs of the heart, though he paid homage to many women. At 36, he met a young professional woman, a law student, who wore her hair cropped short like a man's and who dressed in extremely mannish fashion. They were married 2 weeks afterward. The man was as much mystified as his friends at his strange attraction, and the only explanation he could give was this: "I have always had a fixed fear of long human hair. Since I was a small boy, I have never seen a long, loose hair lying on anything without its disgusting me. Occasionally, when a stray one come home inside my shirt with my laundry, it made me actually ill. I have never known why I had this queer aversion, and all my friends laugh at me for it. I laugh at myself, but that doesn't help matters. In my youth, when women wore their hair fluffy and flying about the face, I was terrified whenever I was with a young woman, for fear one of those long, silky hairs would attach itself to me. I liked several girls tremendously, but the fear of ever touching that long hair prevented my ever falling really in love. The young law student was a girl of brains, personality, and native good looks. We had the same taste and ideas. She was no more interesting in many ways than some of the young society girls I had met, but I loved her short hair. I have been ideally happy in my marriage. My wife, now that she has given up law, and since she knows her short hair is a handicap to me as well as herself, wants to let it grow. She has discarded the mannish clothes, and naturally the short hair is incongruous, but I cannot bear the notion nor explain why." He was told the law of fixed fears, and in about a week recalled an incident of his childhood, which he had not consciously remembered for many years, but which fully explained the complex, and, in the end, cleared it up to the place where he was willing for his wife to have long hair. When he was a small boy, somewhere between 5 and 7, he and his younger sister were playing one day in the woodshed where the laundress was doing the family washing. This was in the days of the washboard and old-fashioned tubs to which were attached the big rollers for wringing clothes. The baby sister, who had very long hair, dropped her ball into the tub, ran and leaned over to rescue it, just as the laundress was ready to put a handful of clothes through the wringer. The baby's curls were carried into it, and she was lifted off the floor by her hair and suspended there for what was a terrified moment before the boy could make the laundress thoroughly understand what was wrong. The strain of music. But every individual has, in addition to those painful ones, hundreds of pleasurable fixations which give him enjoyment. You have preferences of many kinds, which are as intense as they are inexplicable. One woman of our acquaintance loves a certain strain of Dvorak's Humoresque, so much that she is filled with ecstasy every time she hears it, and keeps it on her Victrola to play whenever she is depressed or unhappy about anything. The first time she heard it was one night in the dining room of the Biltmore, just after the theater. The young man whom she loved and is now married to had taken her there to supper. He proposed to her as the orchestra was playing this selection. The Linen Handkerchief. A noted businessman of Kansas City, who prides himself on his hard-headedness, keeps 20 clean handkerchiefs in the right-hand drawer of his private desk because he finds he can talk big deals over with much more confidence if, at the moment of opening the discussion, he can also open up a crisp, creased, perfectly fresh handkerchief. But handkerchiefs are not mere handkerchiefs to him. Indeed, they are a very great deal more. He declares they have a personality all their own. The only kind he will use are those of the severest plainness, but of pure linen. Whenever he is presented with one bearing an initial, a fancy border, or a touch of color, different in any way from the kind he prefers, he not only does not use it, but is upset till he has disposed of it. The fact that this man cannot remember what caused all this does not alter the law. Somewhere in his past, he had a very pleasant emotional experience in which there figured a crisp, clean linen handkerchief. The cuckoo clock. An interesting illustration of how something which has been a symbol of a painful emotion can later become symbolic of a pleasant one is seen in the following. In Denver, in 1909, lived a splendid and sensible young woman who had one little fixation. Owing to an unpleasant experience with a cuckoo clock years before, she could not bear the ticking of watches or clocks. She held an important position in which she needed a watch, but instead of wearing it, hung it up on the wall as far away from her desk as she could see its hands. She would not own a clock, and at night put the watch under her sofa pillows at the far end of her room. This condition had persisted for 15 years. Then the young man, who is now her husband and whom she was deeply in love with at the time, went to California and wanted someone to keep his valuable cuckoo clock for him while away. The young woman not only put it up in her room, but loved its ticking, cuckooing, and everything else. When teased about the sudden change, she declared its noises were entirely different from those of all other clocks, and that it wanted to say, "Julius, Julius, Julius," the young man's name, with every swing of the pendulum. It had been so long associated with him. To her, in his absence, it became a living symbol of her lover. The memory of the old unpleasant emotion was erased and has not returned. In the lesson, Love, Courtship, and Marriage, the effect of symbols on our loves will be taken up more fully. The aim here is to give a few illustrations of the power of all kinds of symbols in our lives. The heliotrope perfume. A Chicago banker of 50, conservative, conventional to a degree, and so austere as to be almost formidable, has one fixed preference. He loves heliotrope, and, though consciously despising the use of perfume, especially by men, must have a drop or two applied to his tie every morning before he could go to the bank. If he forgets it, he makes his chauffeur turn around and take him home to get it. He has had a standing order with his florist for 20 years, and every day before noon, a small sprig of heliotrope is delivered, put into an exquisite little vase, and placed by his secretary at a certain spot on his desk. One day last year, the secretary met with a sudden accident and was sent home from the office before he had arranged the flowers. In the excitement, the little package containing the flowers was put into the taxi with him and carried away. The banker told us himself that though some of the biggest bank heads in Chicago were in his office at the moment for a discussion concerning a loan of $2 million, and every moment important to them all, he could not begin the conference until a new bouquet had been obtained and placed in its vase at exactly the proper angle in front of him. I am fully aware and always have been of the origin of this fixation, though I have never told anyone before. As you know, I am unmarried, but As you probably do not know, I shall always remain unmarried. I have loved but one woman. She loved me in return. I was not a young, impressionable boy, but a man past 30 when I met and cared for her. She always used heliotrope perfume, and the first time I ever saw her, a sprig of these little flowers was pinned to her muff. She died. To me, she lives whenever I breathe this exquisite odor. I would not wish to live myself if I could not have it near me. I have felt this way for 20 years. Strange fixations. There are many people who have freakish fixations which they cannot explain and which, unless they cause trouble, need not be traced to their source. They should, however, be cleared up if they become obsessions. One such case is that of a man who never steps on a crack in the sidewalk. He cannot carry on a coherent conversation when walking with you down the street because he is so concentrated on avoiding the cracks in the cement or boards. A certain Boston woman cannot overcome the notion that germs are in everything and lives in terror lest she will be infected. She washes her hands 50 times a day, will not wear anything coming from a store without first having it laundered, and will eat no food save what is cooked under her own supervision in her own kitchen by a woman she has trained. She is well acquainted with the fact that only lowered bodily resistance makes us susceptible to germs, and that though they are everywhere, we are safe from them if we keep in good physical condition. But that does not eliminate the strange fixation. She is the bony type that cannot bring itself to believe in these new-fangled sciences, so is spending her life in a trench warfare with bacteria. A post-fixation. A Philadelphia minister says that for 20 years he has not been able to pass a gate post, a hitching post, or a fence post without wanting to kick it. Last winter, he said, the bishop was in the city for a few days, and we were entertaining him at our home. I hoped I might be able to avoid going near any post while with him and engaged a car to take us wherever he wanted to go. But the last day of his stay was sunny. He wanted to go for a walk and insisted on its being down an avenue of fine old residences, in front of many of which still stand the hitching posts of the pre-automobile era. For the first block, I managed to keep from kicking these things, but halfway down the second one, I had to step over and touch one with my foot. The impulse was overwhelming. I said something about knocking some snow off my shoe and managed, by turning into another street at the next corner, to get along without doing it again. But I had to do it that once regardless. Pin fixations. Many people cannot walk past a pin on the floor. Others cannot resist the temptation to look at every scrap of paper they see on the sidewalk. Others cannot walk or drive without continuously counting the change in their pockets. Others must count the steps on every staircase they climb and know the number in every stairway of every home they frequent. We know a man in Washington, D.C., who can tell you the number of steps leading into every government building in that city, and also the exact number in every stairway in the U.S. Senate. A woman in Seattle said she never listened to a lecturer without counting the number of steps he took, from the moment he appealed till he left the platform. A man in Indianapolis said he had counted every gesture made by a certain lecturer during a 6-week engagement and had filled a notebook describing them. This was not due to any special interest in the lecturer. He had done the same for every speaker he had listened to for many years. Origin of strange fixations. Every person with a freakish fixation such as these just described has acquired these strange avenues of expression because he was denied more normal outlets. For instance, the woman who was so afraid of germs is a spinster of the most straight-laced type. She has held the same position for 23 years, is faithfulness itself, and conventional to excess. She has not only not married, but never had a love affair. Many of the normal instincts have had to be repressed. Since she is of this severe type, she had expelled them so completely from the conscious mind that the feeling which should have been given to them has broken out, as do all repressed urges, via the subconscious. Her subconscious has merely produced a substitute upon which to expend her energy. The minister who kicks post lived for several years in China as a missionary, as it was difficult for him to learn the language, was denied almost all companionship. He acquired this habit there. The man who counts the steps in Washington was disappointed in love years ago, and in the preoccupation which submerged him at the time, unconsciously acquired this habit. Every person who, for any reason, is driven in upon himself breaks out again through channels which are slightly or extremely abnormal, depending on the type of individual and the severity of his suffering. Every lonely person, after a while, takes on strange habits. All who are compelled to live much alone, and most of those who are forced to repress their mating instinct, ultimately become queer and some unbalanced. Keeping the faiths. If your fixed feelings are fixed faiths, that is, if they reassure you, uplift you, sustain you, and help you to live a better, happier life, do not let anything or anybody take them away from you. If they are fixed fancies of a pleasant sort, such as the preference for heliotrope which the banker has, by all means keep them. Life is all too drab and difficult not to brighten it by these innocent and purifying means whenever possible. One woman's fixed faith. A woman of our acquaintance who took her own part with great gusto in everything else permitted people to impose on her in just one way. She allowed them to push past her into streetcars, subways, and all manner of other places. She gave up her place with no resistance whatever, seeming almost pleased to do so. When asked for the cause of the strange inconsistency, she said, 4 times my life has been saved because I lost a place in line. Twice it caused me to miss a train. Once because the man in front of me at the Pullman window dropped his change and tickets and kept me waiting while he gathered them up. And once because the baggage man did not get my trunk checked in time. Both these trains were wrecked. At another time, I was refused admittance to a packed elevator. I was in a hurry and insisted on getting in. The fact that a large woman who was standing behind me was permitted to enter did not lessen my anger. The operator lost control of his car, which was overcrowded, and it dropped 8 stories, killing instantly every person in it. The day of the historic Iroquois Theater fire in Chicago, I was standing in line for a ticket when I discovered I had lost my purse and stepped out of line to find it. By doing so, I lost the chance to see the play. If I had not lost my place, I would doubtless have been among the hundreds burned alive in that awful disaster. Now, whenever I lose a place in line, I believe it is for some good reason. Bonaparte's firm faith that the bullet had not been cast nor the shell-tempered that could kill Napoleon, not only filled the minds of his enemies with fear of even attempting it, but carried him to many victories. Freeing yourself of fixed fears. But if you have fixed fears of any nature, you must master them or run the risk of their mastering you. Nothing in nature remains stationary. The moment you are not getting stronger, you are getting weaker. The man who stops climbing has begun to slide back. To live a healthy, happy, honorable life, you must be master of your moods. To be master of your moods, the first thing to do is face the fact and begin to be honest and sensible. Mental analysis, this most searching and profound of all human sciences, has proved that most of our worst mental and physical ailments, disappointments, and failures come from our refusal to be frank and straightforward with ourselves. Whether the thing you are afraid of is big or little, real or imaginary, you can be free from it if you try. You are one of God's creatures, and God never meant any creature to be sad, dejected, or frightened. We make ourselves so by violating His divine laws. Renovating the subconscious. If your obsessions are those of regret for past sins of commission or omission, try to think of this subconscious of yours as a pool that you are going to drain by being perfectly honest with yourself. And you can be, because nothing you have ever done, thought, said, or been guilty of was so very bad. The force that rules the universe is big, beautiful, and above all, benign. A benign force, whether personal or impersonal, forgives or ignores our faults. Put yourself in harmony with the divine by forgiving yourself right now for anything that has been causing you regret or remorse. No matter what you have done or failed to do, just remember this. You did the best your nature was capable of at the time, under those conditions, and with those particular temptations. The worse it was, the more is it necessary that you do that much better in the future. You cannot do anything big or fine with fear gripping and crippling you. Whatever negative thing is in your mind, and however long it may have been there, it can be eliminated by doing two things. First, be honest with yourself. Admit to yourself that you have been a weak, silly fool, or anything else that you have been, but don't let it discourage you. Confession is good for the soul. It clears the air. It blows the cobwebs out of your mind. It is a mental vacuum cleaner. Second, realize that whatever you desire to come true in your life can be brought to pass if you really want it. It can be brought to pass by the same power that has brought most of the things you have in your life, your own subconscious mind. It will not do so in a day. The subconscious does not respond to a thought until many times repeated. The only thing it reacts to instantly is feeling. But through a law which is fully explained in the last lesson of this course, any desired impulse can be planted in the subconscious. Once there, it will operate with the same unresting force as these other urges of ours which have been shot into it by emotion. You can plant in your subconscious soil the seeds of anything you truly desire. It will bring forth its harvest according to its nature. You must stop filling this great battery with negative energy. By right thinking, you can make all its energy positive, and that positive force will bring to pass whatever you deeply desire. And this concludes Lesson 3. Hope you're enjoying this. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll meet you at the next video for Lesson 4.